Welcome to the Fully Expressed podcast with Karenna. I am your podcast host, Karenna Soto, and this is a show where we have different conversations that invite you to living a life fully expressed and creating relationships that are fully expressed and creating a business where you feel fully expressed. So, truly bringing your most authentic self to all of the areas in your life and what that looks like. And so, today we have a really special guest. I'm so excited because I just met. Her name is Mari Cruz. And Mari Cruz and I met at a networking event here in San Diego. If you guys, in a previous podcast, we've actually had her, but Marta Geary, who has on this podcast, she was on this podcast, and she is the editor and co-editing in chief and owner of the Locally Well um, podcast as well here and wellness podcast here in San Diego, but she also has created such a wonderful way of networking with others. She has truly like wrapped her arms around the wellness community. And
Mhm.
at one of those events that Marta Geary put together, I met Mari Cruz and we were just talking and connecting. And then she shared her story at the event. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really love her. She is a founder and the owner of a couple companies, which I will let her talk about that. But with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to her and let her introduce herself. Hi, Mari Cruz.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I feel like we're getting to know each other through this podcast and then also just letting everyone else kind of get to know me as well. So like you mentioned, my name is Maricruz, Maricruz Carrillo. I was born in Rosarito, Mexico, but I've been in San Diego since I was 10, so since fifth grade. And I am the co-founder of a company called SunMud, which we do sustainable sunscreen. And then I'm also the founder of Menos Waste. For Menos Waste, I help small businesses transition to a more sustainable space. And I do that through workshops, one-on-ones, and also have a YouTube channel, which I always like to plug in. I am really passionate about the environment. I am also an engineer and I'm also an entrepreneur, obviously. So I'm really excited because I have pretty interesting stories. So I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. And you can just tell that you have so much to offer based on what you just told us. I really want to dig into, you said that you've been going to school here in the United States since you were 10?
Hmm.
Okay, can you tell? I
Yeah.
would love to hear a little bit more about that story. So when I heard this, I was like, ooh, we need to dive into this some more.
Yes.
So what does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting journey. I was born in Rosarito and I lived there my whole childhood. I actually like to say that I had the perfect childhood. We lived by the beach. I went to private school, I had a nanny. I really was living my best life for the first 10 years of my life. But unfortunately, things got started getting a little bit dangerous in Tijuana, Rosarito. So my dad actually decided to sell our childhood home, which was so sad.
Mm.
But hopefully one day I can buy it back. But he decided to sell everything and move to the US just for safety. And that was a huge culture shock for me because I mean, I grew up in Mexico being Mexican, speaking Spanish and just without a care in the world, right? And then I went to, out of all places, we decided to move to Jamul in East County, San Diego. So my school was 99% white, right? So then I went from being Mexican among Mexicans to now being a minority, which was a complete new concept for me. I had no idea. I was in fifth grade. I didn't really know English that well, so I was in the English second language classes, and that's where pretty much all the other Mexicans were in the school. So I was able to build bonds with them, but it was really weird to me. And I immediately started adapting, right? Like most immigrant families do. Where I was like, okay, what do I know about school in the US? And obviously it was the movies, TV shows. So I started adapting and saying, okay, well, I want to be the cool girl, obviously. And like that was always the cheerleader, right? So I started doing things like that. Like I joined the cheer team. I immediately left the ESL or English second language classes as soon as I could because I just wanted to be in the regular class, things like that. I wanted to ride the school bus because that was a thing in the movies, little
Yeah.
things. And I started adapting. And right when I was almost, I felt like home again, we had to move back to Mexico. We couldn't afford the life in the US, unfortunately, and so we moved back to Rosarito, and that's when my life of being a trans-border student began. So I would live in Rosarito, but then still travel because I needed to finish school here. And so this would look like maybe waking up at 3 a.m. from Rosarito, having breakfast, driving, crossing an international border, which was so volatile. Sometimes it was an hour, sometimes it was 3.5. And so kind of gauging that, getting to school a little early, having to like nap in the car if we got there early, or being late very often, right? So that's
Wow.
kind of what that looked like for about 7 years, until I was in sophomore year of university. So that was kind of wild. But I have been in school here since fifth grade. And then now last year, I finished my PhD. So it was a long time. But yeah, it was kind of interesting that I actually wasn't the only one doing that, right? I had friends in the bus that were also crossing the border every day. And it's kind of almost normal here in Tijuana to do that,
Yeah.
which is wild to me now that I'm a little bit of an adult, you know? I'm like, "Wow, I did that."
You
And so
did
many
do
people
that.
do it.
Yeah, you did do that. So for those that don't know, or maybe listening on the other, because I know there's people all over the world that listen to this sometimes too,
Mhm.
is like TJ or Tijuana is like on the border of San Diego. So it's like San Diego to crossing the border into Tijuana, Mexico. And it's such a close thing. And even for me, like someone who grew up in California, like, or even here in San Diego, it's so easy to go in between the two, right? It's not
Right.
like this huge thing. It's like you just drive through the border
It's
and
right
then you
there.
come right back. And it sounds like you made that like your life. Like your dad really wanted something better for you and brought you to the
Mm.
US and then you had to go back. And so you were doing both duality life. I'm so curious, going back to that little part of you that was living here, at the time that you were living here and you started going to school. Did you resist the change? You said that you adapted really well, but did you resist it at all? Or were you like really open to
Mm.
just starting to do a lot what like Americans did, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and actually, I feel like I haven't thought about that, but I definitely was more on the side of not resisting. I'm just in general a very adaptable person, and I think maybe life has made me that way. Also, I'm a Gemini, so I kind of like morph into whatever I need to morph into.
Mm.
So, um, like I mentioned, I started adapting to it, like, speaking English as much as I could. Um, Becoming a cheerleader, all of these things that were American, right? I
Right.
feel like I even started eating a certain way, right? Just to try to fit in and make the change not as abrupt, I guess, or trying to make it better for myself.
Yeah, it seems like you were more open and curious and
Hmm.
leaning into versus resisting it. Um, and it's interesting because on the podcast recently, we've talked a lot about the need to belong. Like, as human beings, like we have such a deep desire to belong and to be a part of communities and we want to be accepted and we want to be like the others. We want to be like, "Wait, you're doing this thing? I want to do this thing too," because it helps us feel connected to one another versus further apart. And it sounds like you naturally were more open to adapting to the differences.
Hmm. Yes, for sure. Although I will say, obviously, I felt comfortable with my community as well. So, the 10 Mexicans that were in the in the school, I was very good friends with, and in fact,
Yeah.
two of them are still my best friends to today. And it's like the most beautiful friendships that I have. Um, Probably because we were bonding on that level, right? Of like
Yeah.
experiencing this school together. So it's not like I abandoned, my Mexican culture for a little bit, but I definitely tried to adapt to the American culture as much as I could.
Yeah. It sounds like, and I want to divide it into a little bit more. Like, you said you're a little bit of Gemini, so you're kind of okay with like almost like chameleon like in
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
adapting. But how did you get to a place now in your life, like truly finding like who you were in that split identity? It's almost like you were living two different worlds
Hmm.
and you were very open and flexible and living to both worlds. But how did you find yourself through that?
Yeah, it's been I mean, that's a very deep question. It's been quite a journey, especially it seems like I've put myself in situations that are uncomfortable throughout my whole life. As
Mm,
in, like, I could have picked any major. I decided to go with mechanical engineering, right? I could have just gotten my bachelor's degree, gotten to work. I decided to go for my PhD. And like all these things of like, I could have made it a lot easier on myself, but
mm,
I think it's just kind of my personality of trying to adapt and trying to like find fun in the challenge, if
mm,
that makes sense.
mm,
I still feel certain times like a little bit like the imposter in these environments, especially in engineering, where even though I have a PhD in mechanical engineering, I'm still like, ooh, at work, when I'm at work, I'm like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing, or like maybe
mm.
I'm not supposed to be here because I'm the only Latina in the whole building, right? And it's like I'm still kind of working through that, but I definitely feel more empowered to fully be myself because of the experiences that I've had. Like I feel like I know how to navigate it, if that makes sense, because
Yeah.
of that initial experience of having to do that.
Yeah. If you're open to sharing, like, what does the imposter syndrome look like? This would be so helpful for anyone that's listening because I think as we're stepping into really owning ourselves and putting us in rooms that we feel called to, like you said, it's
Mhm.
like, "Ooh, should I be in this room? What do you mean?" This feels a little
Yeah.
stretchy, but I want to be in this room. Like, but am I okay to be in this room? Do I know enough to be in this room? So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, and actually I want to correct myself, and I think there's a change now of instead of calling it an imposter syndrome, it's an imposter phenomena.
Mm,
Because it's not a syndrome, like there's nothing wrong with you. It's usually has actually nothing to do with you. It's your environment that you're in. So basically, in case nobody has heard of it before, the imposter phenomena basically is this feeling of not being in the right place and kind of faking um, belonging, if that makes sense. And usually it happens when the environment is not very inviting, or maybe there's not a lot of people that look like you or share your similar experience in a space. So obviously, being a woman of color in mechanical engineering, I've felt that throughout my whole educational career, and it really goes into your deep, deep childhood traumas, right? That you have to kind of work through. And if you are feeling it, like, don't feel bad because I feel like it's almost like extra work that we have to do, right? If we're putting ourselves in those spaces. And it really is a deep psychological work, right? So if I'm sitting in a room with 10 white men and we're talking about a problem or a project that I'm working on, and then they keep kind of saying little things, kind of negating what I'm saying or ignoring or something like that, and I get really frustrated, and I have to go back and think, okay, why am I so frustrated? And where is that coming from? Right? Like, obviously, somebody might say from the outside, well, obviously, you're frustrated because they're ignoring you and all these things. But then if I really meditate on it, I'm like, well, I remember that one time, in sixth grade where my math teacher, who was a white man, did this and like made me feel little and all these things. And like, oh, that's where it's coming from. Right.
mm,
And so kind of unpacking that can allow me to like, okay, maybe they're not attacking me currently. That's just coming from a previous experience. So the next time I walk into that room, I can maybe come with a little more confidence of like, okay, they're not attacking me. That was just my mind kind of reliving that. And then I can more confidently speak up, right? And like say like, "No, actually, I do think I'm right because I this," you know? So it's a lot deeper than just saying like, "Oh, whatever, just brush it off and come back to the next meeting."
mhm.
So it is a lot of work.
Oh, it is so much work. And you just talked about it. Like it's so, but a lot of people I think sometimes do that where like they do brush it off and they're like, I just got to be more confident. I just got to speak up, but it sounds
Yeah.
like you're taking more of the route of actually being with yourself in that experience and getting really, really curious to,
Yeah.
well, where is this actually coming from? And you're witnessing the fact that it's becoming your perception in that situation. And it's an opportunity for you to like work through that, which I'm so grateful that you walked all of us through that because that's the level of work I would say it takes to not only show up differently
Mhm.
externally, but also show up differently internally,
Yes.
which at the end of the day, like yes, we all have this external experience, but I think the most internal experience that we're having is the most present, right? We're the ones
Right.
living with our thoughts. We're the ones living with the frustration. We're the ones living with the anxiety or the heaviness. And you're willing to do that work of like, okay, what is my internal experience happening and where is that coming from? And then how can I be with that part of me so I feel more
Right.
confident, so I feel more safe in these situations to
Yes.
believe my thought, right? To get curious, be lean into what I truly believe in, which is like your most authentic self. Fair?
Right. And then one thing that I want to add is that um sometimes I get stuck in this like mindset of like, well, it's wrong. Like they made me feel this way and it's wrong. But honestly, those 10 white men that were in the room are not thinking about it at all. That's what kinda, like, drives me crazy sometimes is, like, I'm over here overthinking everything and, like, not being able to sleep maybe or something like that, and they c they literally have no idea, that I'm going through all of this, and so that's just showing you that you can't control anybody else, right? So, controlling how I react is the only thing that I can do unless I, like, go and tell them, like, "Hey, you're being mean," or something,
Yeah.
like, it's not gonna change anything. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, you're so right. And I love that you said that because it's so true. Like people really don't know how you're feeling. They're not mind readers. And unless there's someone that's intentionally being manipulative or like
Mhm.
has like narcissistic tendencies or is gaslighting you. And I also think that to an extent, sometimes people don't even realize that they're doing that because they're not aware of themselves. But that doesn't necessarily give them permission either. Like to your point,
Right.
like there's a lot of the work that we can do on our end and be like, how can I manage and be with my experience? And then I also think that if it does get to a place where someone is being disrespectful, like I'm like leading to those hard conversations and be like, hey, you may or may not realize that what you said made me feel this way, but this is how I
Right.
do feel. I don't appreciate you talking to me that way. Or
Right.
love if you ask me more questions about this versus assuming because then there's like those internal conflicts and it can
Mhm.
actually bring you closer together in relationship, but to your point at the end of the day they are not aware of how something makes you feel unless you tell them, and to some extent there is some work that we can do on our end. Is that fair?
Right, and by doing the work on our end, then we
Yeah.
can more confidently come back and be like, "Hey, this is how that made me feel. I would suggest not doing that again."
Yep.
You know?
Totally, because you're working through your emotional response, right? Because our
Mhm.
emotions I always think of it this way, like, it's like if you can navigate how you're feeling and like be with your emotions and allow them to move in the way that they need to move, then you can get way more clear on how to show up in that experience. But
Mhm.
sometimes like you said, this is such a great example because like you got triggered and you realize, oh, it's my 10-year-old teacher, English teacher that did this to me.
Yeah.
But that whole all of your life you felt those things. And so there's like all of this history that your body's
Mhm.
experiencing. So you have to work through that so then you can get more clear to be like, okay, what's actually happening in the present moment? How do I navigate what's happening today, not what's happening to me 10 years ago? Because
Right.
our body thinks that it's what's happening 10 years ago.
Yes.
I would love to know as we like start talking a little bit more about like your businesses, what
Mhm.
inspired you to open up your businesses? Like, and how do you navigate all of these things in a similar way, but in the rooms that you're creating for yourself?
Mhm. And I love that question because, in speaking about this imposter phenomena, I feel like in entrepreneurship is where I felt it least. And I think it is because I'm building my own things, right? I'm building my own businesses based on my values, based on my rules. And it feels very like personal and very like they're mine. So I feel like the owner of, you know, my businesses, obviously. So
You are the owner.
I'm the owner. So it's not so much about like, ooh, am I not supposed to be doing this because I chose to do it and I'm doing it.
Right.
So I decided to start Menos Waste almost 5 years ago now, maybe 6 years ago. Um, because I felt like I wasn't doing enough, which in itself is something I have to like work through, in therapy. I'm always feeling like I could do more, but um, I was finishing my grad school and it was in engineering, and I felt like I wasn't doing enough for the community as a whole and like for the planet. So I decided to start this business to kind of, do a little more and put in my little grain of salt. You could say, into this huge problem, environmental problem that we have, right? And it started off as making natural products, actually. So it wasn't a consulting business at all. It was more like I was making deodorant, toothpaste, and like things like that, but more sustainably. And I really felt like that allowed me to connect with my community because then I would talk about all of the environmental aspects of your personal care. Through my products, right? And through my Instagram, and started growing my Instagram community, as well, putting tips and things of living a more sustainable lifestyle. And then I just started learning and learning and learning and learning. So once I had gathered all this knowledge, people started going to me for advice, right? They're like, hey, I want to start a business too. Like, how did you go about
Oh,
this? How did you go about that? And then I was like, oh, I would love to tell you. And that was like really when I lit up, right? I was like, oh, let's sit down for a coffee and like we'll lay it all out for you. And so I started noticing that I was like, you know what? I really enjoy this. And I really saw a need, especially in my community, my Latino community, because I noticed that there was a lot of businesses that were doing sustainable things, but not really capitalizing on them or noticing. Um, so I was like, this could really be something where I can help my community kind of like access that space of sustainability. It's such a big word, right? Sustainability. And a lot of people just think of like eco-friendly products, right? But
yeah. So what does that mean?
it's so much more. So Menos Waste actually stands on 4 pillars. It's environmental, financial, social, and cultural sustainability.
Mm,
Um, that fourth one is actually a Menos Waste exclusive. I have never heard somebody include that in holistic sustainability, but it's basically kind of saying that these four things have to work together and have to be in balance in order to have a successful business, right? You could lean maybe too much into the environmental sustainability, and then you start feeling it in the financial sustainability side, right? Or maybe you're focusing too much on the finances and you start losing a little bit of the social sustainability of like maybe getting really cheaply made parts or something from like not so made, not so good sources, right?
yeah.
Um, so balancing those four, and the cultural one's really special to me because I really felt it with Menos Waste, where sustainability felt very um different than what I was, if that makes sense. That probably doesn't make sense, but it was very whitewashed
Mhm.
in when I first entered it, right? If you look at in YouTube, like sustainable lifestyle, it was only white women in like Canada or Australia or England. And then I was just like, okay. So like it was really difficult to find myself in that space. So I started feeling like I was deviating from my culture and like from my personality, trying to be more
Wow.
environmentally sustainable. And so I was like, this is literally not sustainable because I'm losing myself in this. And that's no way to build a business, right? You have to be authentic. You have to be passionate about everything that you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to give up when it gets hard, right? So I added that fourth pillar because I really felt myself like losing that, right? And I was like, I don't want anyone else to build a business that makes them lose themselves because
Yeah.
that's literally not sustainable.
This is so good. Can we dive into that some more? Because I feel like, when you get into business,
Hmm.
you get into this place of like, how are other people doing it? And you go out there and search, and you're like, okay, who's doing what? What's doing what? And it's interesting. You see I don't want to call them cliques or just like communities, right? So like to your
Mhm.
point, right?
Yeah.
Communities, um, and different pockets, like even in
Mhm.
business. Like yesterday I went to a conference and I went to the Aspire conference and it was such a beautiful business financial conference. And it gave you all the aspects of like business logistics. We also talked about like finance and like wealth
Mhm.
and investing and all these things. But this specific conference like attracts a certain amount of people, but they're also like a certain and they're amazing. I'm not necessarily taking any away from that. I'm just talking to the
Mhm.
fact that this conference lives in a specific part of the business community. And then
Mhm.
you have other business conferences, like I got invited to one, which is like the business energetics for female entrepreneurs. You
Yeah.
go to that branding and it's like all pink and
Purple.
black and white and purples and it's
Yeah.
just all about the energetics and the type of
Mhm.
woman, the type of business that goes there. It's like all these like spiritual entrepreneurs.
Right.
So, and then now you're talking about this space within a space within a space. You know, you're talking so much to like the sustainability industry and what is
Mhm.
it like to do business in sustainability, but then what does it actually look like within those groups? And I love the fact that you saw yourself. You're like, okay, I'm gonna grow and I want to lean into this and I don't want to lose myself. What was
Mhm.
that like part? What when did that like huge milestone happen where you're like, no, like I'm losing myself and I need to bring my identity back into this? What did
Mhm.
that look like?
I think it was a pretty specific moment when my niece told me, "How come you don't do like content in Spanish?" And
Mm,
I was like, I actually don't know. Like, I don't know why. And so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make an effort to do in Spanish. And actually, if you go farther back in my YouTube channel when I started it like 2 years ago and then I stopped, I have my videos both in Spanish and English. But I started noticing I had no idea how to speak sustainability in Spanish, right? And I was like, like, how do you say, I don't know, carbon emissions or carbon neutral? Like now that I think about it, I'm like, well, it wasn't that hard, but I just had never used them and I had never learned them. And I was like, well, why don't I know all this in Spanish, right? So I was started kind of reflecting on that. I'm like, well, all the content that I'm um, absorbing, whether it be YouTube or articles or conferences or things like that, is all in English and it's all coming from certain people, right? And so I was like, well, I need to change that, right? Let me diversify my content sources a little bit. And once started diving into that, I started noticing, you know what? There's actually so much wisdom in indigenous cultures, in Mexican culture, and my abuelita's culture, right? Like all these things were like, why am I trying to fit into this other mold of like the modern sustainability, you could call it, when I have so much wisdom within me, like in my ancestors and like in just my culture, right? Of what already is sustainable. So I guess my niece was kind of what triggered it of like, because she doesn't speak English, right? And she's like, I want to watch your stuff and I want to follow you, but and she was only like 7 at this time. Um, and she's like, but I don't understand it. And I'm like, oh no, like I'm literally building this business for my community and I am not being accessible, I guess, to them, right?
yeah.
And so that's kind of what took me down that lane. It was a pretty specific moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I would love to know how, I don't know if you know this because I think about this too. So, I'm Peruvian, so I also have a Spanish
Yeah.
background and I speak Spanish fluently, but I was born here in the US
Mhm.
and my parents are from Peru. And
Mhm.
so, funny enough, Nick is just got his holistic practitioner certification, something like that. And he's been
Mhm.
learning so much about how food is medicine. Let's just talk.
Mhm.
And he told me that onions are a great medicine to attack histamine or like when you're sick and things like that. I looked at him and I go, oh my gosh, my nanny from Peru used to give me like literally shaved onion. Like you'd shave the onion and then she'd put sugar on it. And oh my God, I hated it. I hated it. It was the worst taste
Yeah.
ever because she was like, take a big spoonful every time I got sick.
Mhm.
and it helped go away. And Nick goes, he's like, "Holy cow, like, and your grandma and, like, your nanny from, like" I was like, "Yeah, like, she just knows this from our background, our culture, and our
Yeah.
ancestries to what you're talking about." And there's so much wisdom there that he's learning in school about
Yeah.
in the US, and I'm like, "Oh, I didn't even think that I grew up with that." Like, to me, it was just, like, kinda normal, and there's a lot of things that my mom
Mhm.
knows about food being medicine and these different tools and things like that, so it's so beautiful to hear that you're doing that,
Mhm.
and that you have it in your back pocket, you
Yeah.
know? Were you always targeting the Hispanic communities, or
Yeah.
you were always targeting Hispanic communities?
Yes.
Ah,
So it's actually in my name, right? I have the company is called Menos Waste. So Menos meaning less, less waste. And I was very intentional about having a Spanish word in it, um, just to make that distinction, right? Of like, hey, I'm here, I'm Latina, I'm doing this, right? And being very outward about being proud of my heritage. So I made sure to include that menos. And I also saw a bigger need, right,
so
in that
Menos,
space.
for those that don't know what that means, what does that mean?
Oh, menos means less.
Yeah.
So menos waste is less waste.
Mhm.
Um, and I saw a bigger need actually in my community. So it was very intentional,
Yeah.
especially like trying to reconnect them back to Mother Nature and make them realize that they already are doing sustainable things. That was like kind of a wake up moment, I guess,
Ah,
when I was like, oh, like this is really a need and I could really help my community at the same time.
wow, amazing. And so let's talk about your second business. So how did you get to a place of opening up SunMud? Which, by the way, I'm gonna drop a little thing. I've used it and it's so
Yay.
good for those that haven't listened to it. I love it because it's a very healthy, sustainable product. Not just good for your skin, but also good for the oceans. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So Sunmud is really interesting because initially because I already had Menos Waste, I've had Menos Waste for way longer than Sunmud. Sunmud is relatively young. I would say we started working on the formula for our sunscreen about 3 years ago. It took us about 2 years to develop the formula. It's our
Wow.
original formula, which not a lot of sunscreen companies can say. Usually, um, a lot of them white label stuff or just copy somebody else's formula. But that's why ours is special and feels special,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
So I initially started as more of a sustainability consultant for Sunmud. I have two co-founders and I already had Menos Waste. So they were like, hey, we're thinking of doing this. And we want it to be the most sustainable sunscreen in the market. So I was like, I'm in, you know? And of course I fell in love with it. And then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be a founder as well because I love this product and I really think we have something here. So, um, before that, I actually was making sunscreen for myself, probably for like 7 years. I didn't grow up using sunscreen. It's not really part of a Mexican culture. And I was in the sun a lot. Like, I definitely should have been wearing sunscreen. But, I wasn't until I began to surf. So I'm a surfer now, and I began to really get sunburnt out there when I was doing long sessions. So I was like, okay, maybe I should look for a sunscreen. I couldn't find anything in the market that I liked, so I decided to make my own. Having this research background, um, I just researched it myself, and I was like, okay, what can I use to do it? And I just made a little concoction with zinc oxide and shea butter, I think, and a few oils and was just wearing that, but I was looking really goofy out there in the lineup because it was just zinc, right? So it was like it would make me look purple, and looked really silly, but I didn't mind because I was just surfing, right? But the more research I did, the more I was like, I should use this more on the daily. Sunscreen is really a thing you should be wearing every day, not just when surfing. So I was like, "This is not gonna work because 'cause I'm not gonna be walking around with just zinc on my face."
Mm.
And at the same time, I was kinda dating my partner. now my partner. And then I started making sunscreen for him because he's also a surfer. And so he really liked it. But again, we had the same issue of like white face
Yeah.
sunscreen, but we started kind of making tweaks to it and trying to play around with it. And then really when we decided to, or they decided to start a sunscreen company was when his preschool friend was like, "Hey, I hate all the sunscreen in the market." And he's also a surfer. So he's like, "I hate it all. Like, I know Maricruz is making her own. Like, can I just have some of hers?" And I was like, "Sure, I'll make you some. Like, it's not the best." And then he was like, "It's not the best, but it's better than anything out there. So if you're down, let's start a business." And I'm like,
Wow.
"Okay." So it's the three of us. It's my partner and then his preschool friend, right? So it's really a family business. We all like trust each other fully. And Miles is the third co-founder, and he was the one that added the clay in there. And that's when it was really like life changing. We're like, this is the best sunscreen like ever. We really need to make this a thing. And so we did. That was a
Amazing.
long background story, but
Yeah. So how do you manage all of it? How do you manage Menace Waste, Sun Mud, and life?
yeah, we were talking about this before recording that if anyone knows human design, I'm a manifesting generator, which
Mm,
means that I have a lot of energy. Um, because there's also generators, but manifesting generators are like in a different level. I always have to be doing something and I have the energy for it.
wow.
So I also have a 9 to 5. So it's a 9 to 5 and then two businesses, pretty much full time. And I like to prioritize my time. So I'm one of those people with the Google Calendar with like different color coded time blocks for me to work on stuff. Um, and that's kind of how I manage it all by prioritizing.
Mhm.
I always get asked this question, and sometimes people are like, "Well, you must be so good at managing your time." And honestly, I'm not. I'm good at prioritizing my time, which is way different. I think it's not just about making the 24 hours kind of like using them wisely. It's prioritizing what you spend those 24 hours on. That makes sense. I still sleep my 8 hours at least every night. You know, I still like to think I have a good relationship with my partner. We like make time for that and my family and my friends, and surfing, which is like a whole other relationship,
Yeah,
honestly.
it is. Yeah.
So yeah, I would say the way I do it is by prioritizing and
Mhm.
really like staying true to myself, right? Because saying like, "Oh, I can do all of this and not be healthy, like not eat good, um, not sleep well, all these things, like that's not gonna happen, right?" So I have to be honest with myself and what I commit myself to. And I've gotten pretty good at it in the last like 6 years.
Yeah. So good. Did you ever hear or hit a point of burning out or like overwhelm or like this is too much?
Yes, I have during my PhD, but honestly, it was more due to my PhD than my businesses. It was year 2 of my PhD program, and it was a 5-year program. And I was kind of hitting a wall with my research where it had been months since I had gotten a good result. And I was like, what am I doing this for? And then I had a really bad experience with the professor, and all these things like started happening. And I'm like, why am I even doing this? Like, this is
Mm,
not even getting me, like, to what I want in life. That's what I thought at the time, right? And I'm, like, just, like, went into this existential crisis of, like, why am I here on this planet? Like, who am I here to serve? All these things, and, like, it wasn't pointing towards my PhD, and, like, I realized that all I had to do was take a whole week off. I didn't do anything for a week, and it kinda, like, helped me restructure my mind, and then I came back and, like, finished it, you know? Like,
yeah.
it was fine, but it was a point of burnout because of more of, like, the emotional side of, like, what are humans here to do?
Yeah, like
Super
more in like asking yourself like the bigger
the
questions that
bigger
were
questions.
like the bigger questions that are like, well, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I really
Yeah,
called to do? Is this aligned with what I'm doing? I feel
right.
like those moments really come at the best time, you know, but they can be because of a compound effect, right? Like
Mhm.
you're emotionally drained, you're physically drained, you're spiritually drained, and then all of a sudden these big questions come up and you're like, now I have to answer these big questions? What do you
Yeah,
mean? Because I'm like already putting so much energy out there. And
right.
I think that just the fact that you talked about prioritizing is so big in business. Like I also have my 9 to 5. I'm also have my life. I'm actually a projector, so I do not have any kind of energy that you do. Not to the level that you do, but
Yeah.
I have learned to prioritize my time, you know, and like really honor my capacity. And for
Mhm.
me, it has been so much more like, okay, if I'm honoring my capacity in my day to day, what is my capacity there for? So, like, I have 50% battery today. What
Mhm.
are the most important tasks that I need to get done with that 50% battery? And that's how
Yes.
I execute versus thinking I have to do it all, you know? And like
Right.
in the I have to do it all or what's like that, that's where I think we get caught up sometimes. But I
Mhm.
really had to get clear on like, okay, what are my 5 things that I have to do every single day? How do I move the needle in my business? Not do it all, like not get
Right.
overwhelmed by every task, but which task needs to get done today? And I got
Yeah.
forced to doing that because, like, for you, you might have 100% battery all the time or
I
more, because
don't,
as a
I don't.
you know, sometimes, or as a gen, you know, you also spike in energy from my understanding.
Yep. Mhm.
Um, so, and for those that don't know human design, go take your human design because it's such a
Yes.
beautiful way to understand your energy profile. It's like an energy blueprint, if you will,
Mhm.
right? I think that's the best way to describe it. There's 4 different signs. There's the projector, the gen, generator,
Mm.
and reflector. And each of those different buckets have different ways to manage their energy. There's different things that
Mhm.
make them feel really good. But back to what I was saying, you know, as a projector, I had to like really get really clear on like, okay, I don't have that much energy. So what can I prioritize with the energy that I do have and push
Mhm.
through without burning myself out? Because that is not going to be supportive because then I'm like in the stucking spiral versus like, okay, if I can execute what is necessary with
Yeah.
the energy that I do have, that feels really, really good versus not getting anything at all because I'm overwhelmed with the fact that I have to do a lot, you know?
Yeah. And I might be opening up a can of worms here, but being a woman business owner completely
Yes.
changes the game as well because your energy
So
is
glad you
not
brought this up.
constant. I can
Woo!
speak for this like on this for hours, but your
Same.
energy is not constant throughout your monthly cycle, right? I like to call it your lunar cycle because we're in sync with the moon, right? We're that's again, probably a whole other episode, but
We
we're
should do
not the
it.
same.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
let's do it. We're not the same when we are menstruating than when we're ovulating, right? Like right now, it's a full moon, which means I have the most energy, and I'm probably ovulating next in the next couple of days. So that really allows me to do it all, right? Right now I'm in my superwoman phase of like, yes, I can do all the my two business, all the to-do lists, all of this, and clean my house and eat healthy and cook for the whole week and all these things. But catch me in 2 weeks and I'll be on the couch ordering takeout, maybe, and like not doing anything. But understanding where you're at, like I love that you said like I'm at 50% today. And that's totally fine because as an entrepreneur at the end of the day, you're your own boss, right? You have nobody to report to. And yes, you want to grow your business, but be nice to yourself. If you're like, "Hey boss, can I like do 50% today?" And you're the boss, so you just say yes, and like give yourself that opportunity to rest. Mhm.
Amen. I've talked about that before and I love that. And like for anyone that's listening, so she's on fire today and I am deep in my moon. So I am bleeding and low energy. But as an example, like
Yeah.
I woke up this morning without an alarm. I
Mhm.
was like, I can't make anything, but a burrito sounds good. So I went to Gadania and I got myself a burrito. I sat by the beach. I walked my dog and I came home and napped for 3 hours. And now I'm doing this podcast because I
Yeah.
knew that the energy that I did have was what I wanted to bring to the podcast versus like I could have woken up and gotten hard on myself and been like, okay, what else can I do before the podcast?
Mhm.
And that before would have stretched me too much versus I'm like, okay, how much energy do I have and where do I want to put it? And to me, was this podcast recording with you. And but that's such a way of honoring like our different types of where we're at in women and learning about hormone cycles. Oh my God, that is it has been the biggest game changer. So it's so funny,
Right.
you can have human design, you can have
Mhm.
our hormonal cycles, or like to your point, your luteal cycles, and like using that as a tool to meet you where you're at, and also use as a way to like not put pressure on yourself because we
Mhm.
aren't meant to go at 120% or 100% all the time, right? We
Mhm.
need rest. Rest is productive. Taking care of ourselves are really good. And as a woman, we almost have that like built into our system automatically.
Mhm.
It's like, hey, go run your marathon for the first 2 weeks, and then
Yeah.
you're gonna need a rest after that. And I'm gonna prepare you to go run that marathon again and like do what you really want to do. It's like it's our
Mhm.
bodies are working for us, not against
Mhm.
us. They're like preparing us and being like, hey, this is the most sustainable way to live. And it's literally biologically built into us,
Yes.
which is
Like
so cool.
how lucky are we? Like I always cringe when people are like, "Oh, I have my period." Like, "Oh, I hate this." And like, "I hate with being a woman." And I'm like, "No, no, no, no." Like, we're so lucky. We have this ability to like built into us, like you said, to recognize when we have to rest and when we have to go, 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 right? And we're so much more powerful when we do rest. When it is that marathon running time, we're so much more powerful than like not to put them down, but than men, right? Like we're built to be
Differently.
powerful. Yeah.
There was something that I don't know if you know this, but back in like old tribes or old cultures, and I don't know exactly which ones, but they would look to women as the wise one. And they would
Mhm.
actually like every time that they were on her moon and she was bleeding, and they were like, all right, she's gonna go inward. And so all the women, because traditionally, as anyone knows, like maybe you guys end up syncing up with each other, but like
Mhm.
to what you said, like most of us are bleeding around the moons. Like I'm bleeding on the full moon, and
Mhm.
you usually bleed on the new moon.
Mhm.
And so when you're in a regulated state, which is a whole nother thing, right? Like once
Yeah.
you get your hormones optimized and regulated, like you can kind of track that you're on the same as the moon.
Mhm.
But long story short, these like cultures and these tribes would look to women and say, all right, you guys go into your little inner world and go figure out what's working and what's not working for our tribe, for our thing.
Mhm.
And then they would come out of their bleed once they're done bleeding and then their follicular phase and be like, all right, so this is what we do, what we need to fix, what's not working, what is working.
Yes.
Because as you know, a lot of the times in our luteal phase or when we're menstruating, like we're usually our periods are you're usually emotional or things are
Mhm.
coming up for you. You're paying more attention to like what's not working, what is working, what's making you frustrated, what's aligned, what's not aligned. And
Mhm.
it's so amazing that in old cultures, and maybe some still, that are still living in tribes,
Mhm.
they look to women as the guide for that and like, all right, you
Yes.
guys are this powerful beings. Like go do your thing that your body is doing and tell us
Mhm.
what's not working and what is working. And it's like, how can we leverage that in our life today as like also using our cycle and our hormone as our cycle as a way to communicate with us and
Mhm.
for us to listen to versus to what you were saying. It's like it's not an feeling. It's like, wow, there's so much that my body is telling me right now that I get to listen to. It's like it's communicating with us daily. It's not
Mhm.
trying to take you out of the world. It's actually trying to prepare you and set you up for the kinds of success that we're here to do in our lives.
Yes. And something super interesting too with indigenous people that they do and they've done for centuries is trust women to decide when it's too much. So an example would be like the men would go out hunting, right? And they would just hunt, hunt, hunt as much as they can. And that's a very male energy, right? Like, I'm just gonna go and like get as much food as I can. And it was the woman's job to say, okay, now we need to stop. Like, we have
Mhm.
enough. Or like if they're foraging, it's like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of blueberries on the bush, but we don't need any more. So now you stop, right? So women have always been like the regulators in these communities. And I
Wow.
feel like that's so much in Sunmud, my business, because my
Mm.
two co-founders are male. And so I'm the only female, and I'm always the one saying, like, 'cause they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go to 50 stores and, like, get the Sunmud in there and everything." And I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. There's only 3 of us in the team, right? Are we ready for that growth? Like, how can we better prepare to make sure that we're showing up and we're being the best, you know, company or like the best partner to these retailers, right? And I it's always back and forth of like, okay, we should make more products. And I'm like, well, are we all done with the ones that we currently have? Like, have we gotten those
Totally,
to their
yeah.
potential before we start making something new? Like, it's always um, interesting because I feel that way. Like, I'm the regulator. I'm kind of like the um, yeah, the regulator. I don't know how else to say it, but it's interesting in business because I just went to a talk yesterday. It was for Latina entrepreneurs, and they were talking about the difference between the female and the male brain, just literally like neurologically, how we're built to be entrepreneurs, pretty much, because our hippocampus is actually larger than men, and the hippocampus is really in charge of memories and of connections, and which leads to empathy, right? And
Wow.
understanding and connecting. So we're literally better connectors. We can empathize a lot better, so we're really good at finding the need with our customer and our clients and all these things. But really, we live in a male dominated world, right? So, and it's like this balance of like honoring ourselves and our femininity while still trying to make the world a little better, if that makes sense. Like putting ourselves in those spaces when it's the right time, because we do need to heal this world. And I just think we need more feminine energy in general, because of all these things we're talking about, right? Because we have the power, we're closer, I think, to nature. We have those moments where that veil between the spiritual and the present, like physical world, is thinner. Um, and we're just magical like that. Like I
Mhm.
really do think we need more women in entrepreneurship, um, to kind of balance out this highly male dominated world.
Mhm. Wow, what a beautiful invitation into like really owning our feminine, which is I think even more difficult. I don't know if it's like the same, you felt this in Mexico, but at least here in the United States, like our culture is primarily masculine energy. A lot of us
Mhm,
get caught up in that I need to do more now, like I'm not doing enough, which is like a whole thing.
mhm,
But you're talking to so much of just honoring the feminine and like being the feminine energy, which is like more flowy, more integrated. It's the one that can see more of a open and curious perspective and kind of like really integrating versus like the masculine is really like the pushing, the structure, like the
mhm,
forceful, the bold energy. And it's so cool to hear that in your current business today, you are becoming like the balancer in a way. You're like, all
mhm.
right, I'm here for your guys' energy. And
Yes, we need it, but
we're here for your energy because I think you need both, right? I think to
mhm,
your point, like it's not an either or situation, but what the gift that we have as the feminine, like, and I love it, is like we are bringing in what they cannot see. And I do think that more
mhm,
men are starting to see that more often. And I've
mhm,
never, and for me personally, in like the corporate world, most of the times I've had men be my allies. They're the ones kind of like, um, going up to bat for me and like pulling me forward and like helping me grow. And so it's not that I think there's a lot of men that are against it. I just think they don't see it the way that we see it. And so it's an opportunity
mhm,
for us to show them. It seems like you're doing the same thing for your current company with the two men that are in your life and
mhm.
your founders, because that's so cool. And it's like such an invitation for the feminine. I
Yeah.
would love to know what does Marikuts's like fully expressed self look like? So like as you're building all of this, like what's your goal? What are you working towards and how are you bringing your fullest self to that?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, that's funny because I feel like right now, how you're hearing me, how you're listening to me, and how maybe people are receiving me. I think that's my full self right now. Before this,
Mhm.
I sat down, I did some stretching, I did some breathing, and you know, I noticed that is a full moon. I noticed my energy was at 100%, all these things. And I showed up today where I needed to, right? I was actually able to do a lot before this podcast because I realized I was at 100%. And the my fully expressed self is bringing all of that with me,
Mm.
right? It's as an engineer, it started feeling like that's who I was, right? That was my identity. Like when people ask me like, who are you? I would say, look, I'm a mechanical engineer. That was my first answer back in undergrad. Um, and I felt like I couldn't bring all of me to engineering, right? I will never forget when I was in a group for my master's, and they asked when I wanted to do the presentation, um, which I always got put on the presentation because I was the only girl, which that's again another whole episode. But um, and I told them, hey, we should do it, I don't know, April 30th because it's the full moon. And they all looked at me like I was crazy, right? They're like, oh, are you also gonna burn some sage? Like I'm like, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, sure, why not?
um, but I immediately felt like I couldn't bring that to that space, right? And then just being a full woman, like presenting myself as a woman in all these presentations in front of all male engineers, right? Like I had to dress a certain way to mask certain parts of me, right? So I think my fully expressed self is showing up fully as the feminine that I am, right? Showing up with my herbalist background, with my astrology, showing up with everything and using all of those as tools because that's really what they are, right? Once you learn about all these different things, you can use it to live a more fulfilled life. And so showing up to any space with all the parts of me I think is my fully expressed self.
Mm.
Have
So
you seen that?
beautiful. Yeah, I mean,
See,
that's
I'm
so
at
beautiful.
100%.
Yeah, you are
Seen
100%,
that.
you're bringing 100%, but I love that it's just, like, you bringing all of you no matter what room you're in, and I think
Mhm,
that's what we all need to remember. It's like, how do you wanna dress up? Dress up. However you wanna say, you wanna say. Whatever your things are, do it. It's like, why not just own that all of that versus, like,
mhm,
feeling like you have to mask, and I think those are just things that we get to navigate on our internal world, like I was talking about. And then by honoring it internally, like, and owning that part of ourselves, eventually the external world gets a lot easier. I think we put a lot of pressure on
mhm,
ourselves and we think that the external world is against us, but it's so much more like the world will meet you when you step into your fullest express self, right? The rooms will open when you're like,
mhm.
I want the Marie Cruz, like
Yeah,
this is how she is. She's her most authentic self. And then rooms just start to open up that way. Your connections start to bring you in the same directions because you're bringing all of you versus if you're constantly kind of like owning maybe 50% of you, the rooms that accept 50% of you are gonna be there,
yeah,
right? They're gonna be
mhm.
like the constantly the background. And you're like, wait, I want to be more like this, but it starts with us first.
And most importantly, you'll enjoy everything a little more. Right? My 2 words for this year is joy and ease, and I think being fully expressed allows any sort of environment and any sort of scenario or action to be a little more joyful and to be a little easier, right? Because you don't have to think about like, "Oh, is my turtleneck, like, long enough?" Or, like, "Am I covering my butt?" Or, like, "Oh, am I saying something weird because I'm just being myself, right?" Like, it kinda takes a weight off of, like, you know what? Just be yourself so that you can't say anything wrong because you're just being
You.
yourself. And
Yeah.
so everything becomes joyful. That meeting with 10 white men now all of a sudden is kind of like an experience, right? And I'm just going in there and being like, "Let's see what happens today," you know?
Yeah.
And so it really decreases the stress level, I think,
Mm.
and it really helps also with that imposter phenomena at the same time.
Yes. So good. I love this. I so loved this conversation with you, Maricruz. How can This was amazing, and I love how you just brought all of you today, which is so cool. I think the lines really aligned in that. So thank you.
Mhm.
And if someone wants to follow you, continue to get to just like support you, celebrate you, learn more from you, where can they find you?
Thank you. You can find me on my website, menoswaste.com. I'm also on Instagram. We really have a close knit community over there that I love. And that's at underscore menos waste underscore. So there's two underscores in there. And then I also have a YouTube channel, as I mentioned. I started it up again this year. So I have a few videos in there, and it focuses all on helping you build a small business sustainably. And again, with the four pillars of sustainability, not just an eco friendly business. Um, and then, of course, if you want to support SunMud, I do think we have the best sunscreen. So if you want to check it out, that's sunmudsunscreen.com. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's we can stay
Amazing.
in touch.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was so sweet. And yeah, it was just such a great conversation. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes. Thanks for having me.